going on from that, I then got involved in this knowledge transfer partnership with the Open University. And by doing that just now, I'm also working closely with Albion Environmental. And if you don't know what a knowledge transfer partnership is, it's basically a relationship between an academic institution, so that would be the Open University in this case, and a company, which would be Albion Environmental, and an associate, which is myself. And as a KTP associate, I act as a link between the academic and the company. And possible aims of KTP projects can be to acquire new capabilities, to redesign business processes, and to develop new products or services. And this KTP that I'm involved in is funded and assisted by Innovate UK, and the internationally renowned experts at the OU provide myself with the knowledge and skills in bioaerosol monitoring, as well as some different training research opportunities. And alongside that, I've also been investigating ways of bringing innovation and development to bioaerosol monitoring. And over the course of the KTP, I'll then be passing all of these capabilities and research onto Albion Environmental. And so a lot of time and energy and money does go into this KTP, like it would with any KTP. So this presentation is really about why bioaerosol monitoring is important and why is so much effort gone into this KTP because of the importance of bioaerosol monitoring. So I'll just quickly touch on air pollution at large. It's clearly a big issue, and with industrial CO2 levels always rising and other pollutants from burning fossil fuels increasing, it's definitely a larger issue in certain parts of the world. And so as a result of wildfires, certain places are seeing more risks of air pollution, and millions of people die each year due to exposure to outdoor air pollution. So clearly it is a really large, widespread health issue. However, I don't think it's one that here in the UK many people think about too much. It's seen as a bigger issue in other parts of the world, and nearer industrial areas, or really just in city centres. Whereas here in the UK, on our doorsteps, it's not something we see as a big risk necessarily. And although access to clean air is a basic human right, I think it's one that perhaps we take for granted here in the UK to an extent. Especially considering that not many people necessarily realise that bioaerosols are in fact air pollution, and therefore are quite a big risk. So I've got a poll that people should be able to access if you go on to polls, where either at the bottom of the screen or the top of the screen.
It should appear on your screen now. That's just to check you're all listening.
Yeah, to check who's listening and to you know, see what the sort of audience background knowledge is of bioaerosols and bioaerosol monitoring.
A fair mix for you, Jennifer.
Yeah, so most people do know what they are. We've got a couple of experts who know exactly what they are, so I can call on them if I've got any difficult questions. And a few people that don't really know what they are at all, so that's good. Or one person, but yeah.
Okay.
Interesting results, and a good mix. I'll close that. And
could the other see? Sorry, I stopped that. Could you actually see the results?
I could.
I don't know if anybody else could see the results. Maybe all of us could see them.
No.
No. Oh, okay. I'll see what the results were exactly. So we had 4% of people responses where I don't have a clue what bioaerosols are. 54% said I have a vague idea of what they are, and 43% said I know exactly what they are. So most people kind of have an idea of what bioaerosols are, but they aren't entirely sure. So yeah, to explain what they are, bioaerosols are, oh, it's not working.
Click on the screen and then press your arrows.
Okay, there we go. So bioaerosols are the living or non-living components of organisms, typically microorganisms, that have become airborne. So this can include things like fungi or bacteria, things like yeasts and also viruses, or if we're talking about organisms that have released particles, that could be things like pollen, or in the case of microorganisms, they might release things like endotoxins and glucans from their cell walls. So it's a vast range of different things, but the commonality is that they are all fairly small in size. So viruses are particularly small at less than 0.5 micrometers in size, which, as you can see from the chart, that's going to be far, far smaller than anything you can see with the human eye. Bacterial cells, spores and fungi, they can all be a little bit larger, but also, again, very small generally. And pollens and plant spores, again, they're larger, but they are 100 micrometers is about the maximum size you get, so not much larger than the diameter of a human hair. So because we're talking about such small things, that means that there can be a lot of these things within the air that we can't even see. And it's actually found that bioaerosols are responsible for 34% of indoor pollution. And again, because of the small size of bioaerosols, that gives them an access into the human body. So if they are 10 micrometers or less, they can then infiltrate the respiratory system and get into the airways. And for particles that are under 5 micrometers, they can penetrate the pulmonary alveolus, which is the really tiny air sacs within the lungs, which then can cause allergic inflammation and other diseases. And so the harmful health consequences that can result from this access into the human body can be things like fatigue and headache. It can be eye and skin irritation, flu-like symptoms, respiratory issues such as asthma and allergies, gastrointestinal illnesses such as nausea or vomiting, and also immunotoxic effects, which is basically harm to the immune system. And so this kind of shows why it's important to do bioaerosol monitoring because of these health risks. Another one is specifically with a type of microorganism called Aspergillus fumigatus, which can be present within bioaerosols. This is an opportunistic fungus, which means that it only really infects those who are immunocompromised, such as people who receive cancer drugs or people suffering from HIV. And when it does infect these people, it can be lethal. And for this reason, immunocompromised individuals are recommended not to handle organic waste, which I'll explain a bit more about the link with organic waste in a moment. So I think we've got another poll should come up here. Alistair, are you able to
give me a sec.
Launch the next poll? So before I go into bioaerosol sources, I would just like to see what kinds of sites the audience work on or work at in terms of bioaerosols, or just in your day-to-day jobs. If there's any waste management sites that fall into these categories that you should now be able to see if you go into polls.
I'll try my best to do it right the way this time.
Seems to be working fine. Over half the people have voted now.
Sorry to interrupt. Can
Yes.
you put more than one down? At the moment, I can only put one, and I'm actually work at more than one.
There is an option that says more than one. So I suppose you would.
Second last option, more than 1 to 5. Basically, we knew that people would be more than one of these.
Thank you.
You see that?
Okay, so
That should be the results shared now, Jennifer.
okay, great. So everyone should be able to see the results. So we've got well over half work at more than one of these waste sites. A few people are at waste transfer and waste sorting sites, one person at compost sites, and a few people at AD sites, and a few at none of the above. So we've got quite a good spread of the different types of sites that I'll talk about in just a moment. Okay. So generally bioaerosols exist at background concentrations, and these levels are pretty low and therefore not harmful. However, they can be emitted in high concentrations by human activity, and that's where there is the potential for harm. Some of these human activities can be industrial farming, such as intensive pig and poultry farms, but the other main sort of source, human source, is waste management sites. So that could be any of the sites that we just had in the polls that most people in the audience do seem to work at or work on. And a particular concern is with organic waste, which I mentioned earlier. And that's because on an organic waste treatment site, whether it's compost or AD, this waste is degraded by using microorganisms and making sure that they proliferate throughout the waste in order to break it down. And as a result, you end up with really high levels of microorganisms within the waste. And this means that when the waste is moved or handled around the site, the microorganisms can then be released into the air as bioaerosols. So, for example, on a compost site, there's a lot of different processes where the waste is going to be moved around. So when it's coming onto the site and it's being shredded, or if it's being moved around, being processed or turned in windrows, during screening processes and movement on and off the site, these can all be processes that cause bioaerosols to be formed. With anaerobic digestion, it's a little bit different because a lot of the processes are happening in an enclosed space, so bioaerosols aren't then getting out into the atmosphere. However, as waste is brought onto the site, depackaged and pre-treated, this can still be a source of bioaerosol levels. And although and AD workers are exposed to lower concentrations of bioaerosols compared to compost workers. Typically, researchers have found that workers at AD sites are exposed to similar types of bioaerosols and pathogens as the workers that are at compost plants. So here I've just got a quick clip to show you what it looks like when if it'll load, what it looks like when bioaerosols are released as a result of windrow turning.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on from that, oh, I think maybe we need someone to mute. So bioaerosol concentrations, they can be highly variable at background levels, so it's hard to know what these typical normal levels are that we are exposed to out in nature. However, research has found the typical levels that people are exposed to indoors. So in slightly higher environments, or environments where you might expect concentrations to be higher, so such as retirement homes or school buildings, you can see that the levels are below 500 colony forming units for bacteria and below 150 colony forming units for fungi. So those are fairly normal low levels. And in comparison to composting, if you were to stand near a windrow as it was being turned, you could be exposed to bioaerosol concentrations exceeding 100,000 or occasionally even over 1 million colony forming units. So there's a pretty large gap between sort of typical indoor levels and the levels that are produced through bioaerosol through windrow turning. And so I think this is where the last poll should come in, if you can get that up, Alistair. And it's just this slide will think about who is affected by this. So in terms of your own jobs and how bioaerosols affect you, is that affecting yourself as a staff member or your other staff, or is it affecting your customers or members of the public or multiple? So it looks like so far everyone's going for the first three.
I think we made that one too easy, Jenny.
Maybe. We've got one person who's put staff, or 2 people now, so they're really mostly affected, either themselves or their colleagues and the people that they work with. But yeah, most people find that it affects everyone.
Okay. That's them
Did everyone
shared.
get to see the results?
Yep, that's them. You
Yeah.
should have them.
Okay, great. So yeah, most people have said all of them. So I'll go through that in a bit more detail. So yeah, as said before, members of the public are affected. So any sort of sensitive receptors near site, whether that's nearby workplaces or homes, they'll be affected by the environmental bioaerosol emissions from that site potentially. And site staff can be affected in different ways. So the staff that are sort of on the front line dealing with the waste, whether that's vehicle drivers or waste sorters, they're most likely to be exposed to bioaerosols. So obviously that's a risk to their health, and that's how that affects them. With site supervisors or SHEQ advisors, again, they might be exposed and have health risks, but also they need to manage the health risks of the other staff on site. And so they've got a responsibility to those staff to make sure that the health risks are minimised. And again, it's a bit the same with the operations manager or site managers in general. They need to ensure that the risk of exposure is as low as it possibly can be in order to ensure the safety of site staff and nearby sensitive receptors. So they've got a lot of responsibility there. So I'll talk a little bit about bioaerosol monitoring and what is involved in different types. So environmental monitoring is essentially when we measure bioaerosol concentrations that are emitted into the external environment around the site. So this follows M9 guidance, which is a set of sort of practical rules and guides for doing this. And this guidance is set by the Environment Agency and is really there to ensure the safety of any nearby sensitive receptors around the site. Occupational monitoring is when bioaerosol concentrations are monitored so that you know what levels site employees are exposed to, and this can come in the form of static monitoring or personnel monitoring. With environmental monitoring, this would typically be done to ensure the safety of sensitive receptors and is therefore often conducted to comply with permits or gain licenses. So there's a legal obligation to conduct environmental monitoring often when this is done. And further benefits of doing it is that it can reduce the likelihood of site disruption from possible fines, possible shutdowns of the site if the levels were really, really high and it was a problem. So yeah, it's really just there to ensure site the levels aren't going above a certain level. With occupational monitoring, however, that's mainly to ensure the safety of the on-site staff. And with waste management, I think this is particularly important since waste management sector workers have such a high rate of accidents compared to the UK national average, 4 times this average. And that's obviously a big health issue. And so occupational monitoring may be done as it's a cost requirement, so a control of substances hazardous to health requirement to assess the bioaerosol risks, or it could also be done to avoid any lawsuits or accident illness claims if anyone was badly harmed by bioaerosol exposure. And further benefits of this can be that improving the safety and well-being of staff can then result in increased productivity and an improved work culture. So occupational exposure limits don't exist. One of the reasons, there's a few reasons, but one of these is that exposure should be adequately controlled as far as is reasonably practicable, rather than just at a limit and just kept below that limit. It should be reduced as much as it can be. Environmental exposure limits, however, are in place, and these are at 1,000 colony forming units for bacteria and 500 for fungi. And if a site does find that their levels are high or there might be a risk, there's different things they can do to manage bioaerosols. So there's a number of controls that can be used following the control hierarchy set out by GOSH. So first of all, they would want to look at isolating the risks, so looking at areas where there might be higher risks and ensuring that staff are not entering such areas or not without certain precautions at least. There's also a number of mechanical controls that can be employed, such as ventilated vehicle cabs and water dust suppression. And also as a last resort, there's also the option of respiratory protective equipment, which would need to be in the form of FP3 masks often. And this is all really, these controls are important, and it's important that they are upheld and maintained as employees learn by example. And if employees don't see good safety habits being practiced around the workplace, then they don't think safety is important, and then that can then lead to a higher risk. So any controls or safety risks do need to be taken very seriously. So what can Albion Environmental do to help with this? So having taken on the KTP, Albion Environmental are now able to provide a bunch of services in terms of bioaerosol monitoring, such as environmental monitoring and occupational monitoring. Other things we can do is advise on monitoring methods, interpret data and provide bioaerosol exposure banding, and give reports or mitigation and management advice. Other things we do at Albion is prepare permit applications and planning application assessments. We can select and vet RPE and provide on-site health and safety training, and also fugitive dust monitoring. And so through the KTP and the work that we've been doing, we've been able to give Albion a comprehensive range of bioaerosol services to improve the amount of services that can be provided locally in the central Scotland area. And this means that we can be adaptable and tailor the work to particular clients' needs, and also respond to clients nearby and plan visits very quickly and reliably for them. This KTP also builds a long-lasting relationship with Open University, which means our work can be reviewed by industry-renowned experts, and also through the processes of the KTP we've been able to innovate and improve services. And before I finish up, as part of my job with the KTP, I set up an online survey a while back. So if anyone on here does bioaerosol monitoring or knows a lot more about bioaerosol monitoring and also the content of the M9 guidance note, this survey would be relevant for you. So it basically asks asks questions about the guidance note and how useful you find it. So yeah, if you'd be interested in taking the survey, I suppose say in the chat, or you can get my email and let me know and I can send you the link or something. But yeah, that's the end of my presentation. So if there's any questions, do let me know in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and share. And yeah, I think that's it. So presumably there haven't been any questions, Alistair?
There's no question.
Not yet.
There you go. There is a question for you there.
Oh, there's no.
Before we jump to the question, thank you, Jennifer. Well done. I don't think it's particularly easy presenting over the remote interface sometimes. I'm always amazed when we talk about bioaerosols that, you know, you talk about composting facilities producing up to 1 million colony forming units, you know, potentially, and then the safe limits are way down at 1,000, you know, and you know, to a certain extent at composting sites in particular and AD plants, we've got our work cut out to try and manage, you know, in terms of health and safety. So be interested in people's views in terms of what they are doing and so on, if they've got any sort of experience in how they manage that risk. So the first question I've got for you, Jennifer, is how does M9 apply in Scotland, or is there an equivalent?
That's a really good question. So M9 doesn't actually apply in Scotland. SEPA haven't really released the same level of regulations and information about bioaerosol monitoring, and it has been seen as a bit of a you know, not a failing on SEPA's part, but is something that could perhaps be improved, and SEPA maybe should have a harder stance on this. They do make it necessary for monitoring to be conducted on sites where there's a sensitive receptor within 250 metres of the site, but typically occupational monitoring is more something that's done in Scotland, and environmental monitoring isn't quite as heavily regulated or conducted in Scotland compared to England. But it could be that that changes in the future. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else with it? Oh, there's a couple of things here.
Okay.
The question: do you work on anything to do with modelling systems for bioaerosols?
Not really. The processes of modelling aerosol exposure or modelling aerosol emissions from a site is quite technical, and it's a very high level of expertise, even more so than aerosol monitoring is. So that's not really something that we work on as part of the KTV. As interesting as it would be, it's just another step up that's not necessarily as necessary as the sort of all these integral parts of aerosol monitoring that I have covered.
Okay.
Yeah, next question.
Okay, the next one's saying thank you very much, Jennifer. There you go.
Okay.
Reducing exposure to substance to ALAP applies to asthmagens. Do we presume that asthmagens are always present in bioaerosols?
I wouldn't say you would assume that they're always present. Bioaerosols can be made up of lots of different types of microorganisms, and these microorganisms can all have different effects on the human body. Some might not cause any harm, and some, like with the case of Aspergillus fumigatus, they can be really harmful. And so it really depends, but it's very technical and scientific to actually look at bioaerosols and look at all the different organisms contained within them. But it's highly varied, so you don't really, if you've got a sample of bioaerosols, you wouldn't know that it always contains this or that. It's always varied. So no, I guess no is the short answer to that question.
Is it worth just briefly, Jennifer, explaining what asthmagens are?
Aspergillus, yeah. So I mentioned Aspergillus fumigatus. So that's it's a group of fungi, and Aspergillus fumigatus is one type of species within that. And then these other aspergens, they are quite often they these fungi can be responsible for a number of allergic or infectious responses in the human body. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, no, thank you, thank you. Next one, is there any data for a typical bioaerosols for different types of plants? So I presume the questioner's thinking, you know, for say a recycling plant, is there a typical level, or composting, is there a typical level?
I wouldn't say so, because it can vary quite highly with sites. From my experience of sites that we have monitored so far, it's very dependent on a number of factors, and quite often I would say you can have some days where you go to a site and the levels are all zero and it comes back just with nothing, and then other days you go to the site and it's over the environmental exposure limits of 1,000 for bacteria and 500 for fungi. So levels are very variable, and there's not, as far as I'm aware and what I've come across, I've not seen sort of average typical values for any one type of site. So unless anyone else knows of these levels or concentrations, then I don't think that they exist.
Okay, thank you. A question from Adimi. Hi, Adimi. Nice to see. Adimi used to work for me probably a long time ago. I'm probably going to say 5 years ago, but I'll probably find out it's about 10 years ago or something. Hi, Jennifer. How far can bioaerosols travel from their source point when mobilized?
That's a good question. So typically it's found that so as they move, they do disperse, and they'll spread out, and so the concentration will be reduced as the distance increases from the site or from the operational sources. And so it's thought that about somewhere between 250 meters to 300 meters away, that's when you tend to go back to background concentrations. So from the source at about 250 meters to 300 meters, you're then going from the source levels to zero. So it's about that distance, I suppose, although it could be less and it could be more because it does vary, but that's the typical kind of distance that we're working with.
Okay, just I'm going to sneak in a wee question for myself. Does weather affect bioaerosols?
Yeah, so they're affected by a number of things. Aerosol monitoring actually can't be done in rainy weather, which is quite nice, because you don't have to go out and do sampling if it's raining. Because if it is raining, then that the water can then absorb the bioaerosols, which then means you'll come back with a lower sample. But winds can also be a big factor. So if it is windier or the site is more exposed and open to winds, that can affect the dispersal and the dilution of bioaerosols around the site in a number of ways.
Okay, thank you. Next question. You're not getting a rest at all here, Jennifer.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Do you do any monitoring in energy recovery facilities? And if so, have you identified any high-risk areas within this type of facility?
So I've actually not. I've only been working on composting sites and mixed recycling facilities. That's about it in terms of where I've actually monitored, and I've not read much about the risks at energy from waste sites, or energy recovery sites, sorry. So yeah, I don't actually know what the high risks would be there, if there are any. I would need to go and do a bit more research on that and come back to you, I think.
I think you'll probably find, Jennifer, it'll be the same principles. It'll be the store, you know, how old the waste is, the storage of the waste, and then any sort of mechanical shredding and so on.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think potentially there is an issue there, depending how old the waste is.
Yeah.
Okay. Apart from on compost sites, are there any particular tasks that always cause high levels of bioaerosols?
Okay, apart from the compost sites. So with the AD, as I mentioned, as you're bringing the waste onto the site and sorting it, as long as the waste has a considerable level of organic waste within that, then you're probably going to expect some levels of bioaerosols. So I suppose if you're looking at all waste sites in general, there's not really going to be much of a risk if there isn't any organic waste on that site. But if you're looking at landfills, mixed recycling facilities, AD facilities, and compost sites, as long as all these types of waste sites do have, or the ones we're talking about, as long as they do have a considerable level of organic waste, then chances are there's going to be considerable level of bioaerosols emitted from the sorting and the movement of that waste around the site.
Okay, thank you. I'm presuming the answers Jennifer's given are fine, but nobody's asked for further clarification in the chat. So if anybody has got anything, then by all means put some more clarification in. Okay, next one is, can you make any comments about the M9 guidance survey at this stage? When will this survey be concluded? I think that's...
Yes, we started this, I want to say, over a year ago now, I think, actually. It was quite a while ago that we started the survey, or about a year ago, perhaps. And we just didn't get very many responses, whether that's because not enough people have seen it, or people don't know enough about M9 to feel like they have enough to say. We only got about 6 or 7 responses at the time, so we've not really been doing anything with the results until we get more responses. So we are just kind of hoping that perhaps more people see it, or if we keep sharing it on platforms like this, we'll eventually over time get some more responses. And if we get, maybe 15 to 20 or something, then there's actually something we can do with that. But at the moment, we are just hoping for more responses before we use anything with the data that we get from it.
Okay, sorry, I've been distracted there. Joanne from the HSE has just put up a wee comment. I think it's more a question rather than a comment. HSE has found jet washing and maintenance type activities particularly expose workers to high levels of bioaerosols. I think that was just a comment, Joanne, yes? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, just trying to unmute. Yeah, that's right. Just a comment that.
Thanks for that. Well, one of the interesting queries I had a wee while ago was in terms of COVID, was whether there was a particular risk from pressure washing of vehicles collecting waste, and to be honest, we struggled to find anybody that gave a sort of definitive answer on that.
I wouldn't say I would add, Jennifer probably got a comment, but I wouldn't say it would add any risk, but that they should already have assessed the job itself in terms of jet washing and have precautions in place anyway for that sort of, the risk is more likely to come from the bioaerosols than from COVID-19.
But that ended up being my answer back to them, that they needed to look at that and do that. Okay, I'm fairly conscious of time. Well, maybe there's one more here, so maybe go for one more and then finish up from there.
Sounds good.
For clarification, would transfer of food waste from refuse collection vehicles into onward transportation containers come with a potential for high levels of bioaerosols?
Yeah, another good question. That could definitely be a risk. There have been certain risks associated even just with collection of food waste. and looking at how this changes depending on the time in between the food waste pickups. So if you're looking at food waste being collected every 2 or 3 weeks, then that waste is being stored for a long time at the houses, and then that's giving it a chance for microorganisms to incubate, and then when it's collected, that can lead to exposure to bioaerosols. So assuming food waste is being collected every 2 weeks or longer, and then that food waste has had quite a long incubation time between transferring it from one vehicle to another, then yeah, that would definitely be a potential high risk of bioaerosols.
Hi Jennifer, it's Jo again. Can I just add to that? I don't know if you agree. I'm just aware of one discrete study where they took measurements with regard to food waste and organic garden waste, obviously organic garden waste, and they found the garden waste had much higher levels, and that was just as exactly as you said, because that had been hanging around longer, so you know, had more time to sort of degrade, and far more bioaerosols were given off than the food waste, but that was purely because the food waste hadn't been hanging around so long.
Yeah, and that's actually, it's an interesting point, considering going back to COVID just now, and you know, the amount of people that have, you know, done stuff to their garden and trimmed their hedges and everything, and then just left that waste in parts of their garden or parts of the street, as I've seen near me. That's, you know, there is potentially quite a high risk of bioaerosols as garden waste management opens up again and everyone's bringing in waste that has just been lying around for weeks at a time.
Okay. Could you maybe just unshare your screen, Jennifer?
Yes, of course. There you go.
Hopefully I can share. Okay. Well, thank you very much to Jennifer. I think you'll probably agree she did a fantastic job fielding all these questions. Just a couple of sort of closing things from myself. I think I've got the reason I was wanting the slide up was I'm sure I've got a date on here that I wanted to share with you. So we're trying to, as I said at the start, we're trying to run a few of these things. So if anybody's got any ideas for things they would like covered, or if they've got particular specialisms that they would be happy talking, then by all means, you know, get in touch with us. We are planning to run one on the WISH guidance. As you probably know, the WISH guidance about COVID's been, I think it's in version 6. Somebody might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's currently version 6. And you know, we're going to try and organise a couple of speakers just going through the process of what they've tried to do and what they've tried to pull together, and then just have a general discussion about it. And maybe whether there's lessons to be learned in the future, and whether we need to, you know, look at things in the future. So that's 26th of June. The time has not been confirmed yet, but I've got a feeling, no, I'm not actually going to say when the time is. Now that I think about it, I think I was going to say it was going to be the same time, but it might not be the same time. So keep an eye out. We'll try and post it on social media and so on, and post it on the website as soon as we know the time, and we'll try and do it in a similar sort of format as this. So apart from that, from me, thank you very much. Anything from anybody else before we will wave bye to each other? And I've actually lost the chat function, Jennifer, so I don't know if you can see the chat function. In case there is anything else.
No, just a lot of thank yous I'm seeing, I think.
Perfect.
I think it's okay.
All right, thank you very much. We will post, that was the other thing, just briefly. We have done the video. We will share it up on as a news item on the website. So if you've got colleagues or whatever that might be interested, then by all means point them in that direction. And all that's left for me is to say thank you very much for attending, and have a good rest of your Friday. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
And thanks, Jennifer.